We do touch on some heavy topics, and you can always check the description for more details on this episode. The TURTZED Podcast and content in this episode is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. Neither I nor my guests are healthcare or mental health care providers, and we are not licensed or authorized to provide professional medical advice. For more information, please see our policy at TURTZED.com. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And so in this conversation, we're going to speak with Brian, who is a therapist here in New York City, and talk a little bit more about my story, share what different types of therapy could possibly look like, and almost demonstrate what a therapy session could be. And so in the combination of all that, my hope is to share more with you and also give you an idea of what therapy could look like if you're hesitant and haven't wanted to try it yet. Brian, welcome to TURTZED.
Hi, Charlie.
It is so great to have you. And I think for me, the reason I reached out in the first place was because I love the videos that you make on Instagram, where you talk about things that people hold shame around and people struggle to talk about, and you bring your personality to it. So it provides an easy way for someone to listen and hear what you're saying when it can also be a more serious topic. Mm-hmm. And so in today's conversation, I'd love to not only talk about some of those things, but also show people what it's like. I'd love to give the listeners a little bit more information about who you are. How did you decide to become a therapist?
I was a dancer, my whole life. And I went to school for musical theater. And then I moved to New York and, started auditioning for Broadway shows. And that was always the goal. And then I very happily achieved that goal when I was 24. And then I really thought, oh shit, now what? I really didn't know what else to do. I looked around at the people I was working with, and a lot of them were very literally twice my age and very unhappy. And because of where they were in their lives, they were trying to figure out what was next for them and, kind of grapple with their life decisions. And I just kind of went there with them, inappropriately so. So I started looking at 25 years old actively looking for what I would do next. I applied to graduate school for writing because I thought, okay, well, that'll be a stable career because I was 25. So I got a master's in writing, which was a wonderful experience and not in any way practical. And then I stayed in that show. I was in Chicago on Broadway. And I stayed in that show, and there were, moments of absolute joy and fulfillment and like, oh my God, I'm doing what I wanted to do. And then there were, years at a time of struggle and pulling my hair out. But where therapy came in was I saw in my community, which was, Broadway dancers, gay men, gay Broadway dancers, there was an epidemic of gay suicide, men taking their lives, and generally they were over age 40. And I saw this, way too much. One would have been too much, and I saw it way too much. And it was terrifying because, one, I thought, okay, well, someday I'm going to be 40. What is going to happen to me? And by this point, I was in my late 30s, so it was not too long from now. I thought, what's going to happen to me? That I'm going to cross this threshold into 40, and what happens? I'm okay now, but what if I'm not then? And then two, I thought I have to do something. I would like to be able to help instead of just sitting here watching it happen in horror or pretending it's not happening. And then three, I knew I had to do something else eventually. Dancers have a shelf life. So I started therapy when I was 38 years old. I had done I've been working with coaches and stuff before that, which was actually very fruitful and very helpful. But I started working with a clinical psychologist as a patient when I was about 38. And he really inspired me. He was also a writer. He wrote biographies completely unrelated to therapy.
Well, you related to him because he wrote, and that was
Yeah.
at one point something you wanted to do.
Well, that was the thing. I thought, okay, I don't really want to be a therapist, but I do want to be a writer. So I'll be a therapist and then write on the side. And then, of course, what happened was I started studying, and I was like, oh, this is, I think meant to do is not something that I fully believe in, but like this, when I started studying, I realized, okay, this work is giving me the fulfillment and the grounding and like the sense of usefulness that as a dancer, it was all about me in a wonderful way. It was just like, that was my expression. I was doing it because I felt good doing it. Some people say like, oh, you were giving the audience joy. I was never thinking about that. I was thinking about how good I felt, so.
How good you felt giving the audience joy.
Sure. Sure. I'd love to think of it that way. But really it was not, I didn't think of it as a useful thing. I just thought it was as something that felt good. And therapy is useful. No matter what, I know my intention is to be useful. Mm-hmm. And that feels entirely different and very, very good. So that's how I got to therapy.
What's interesting about what you were talking about and some of what I shared in the first 4 episodes is that I think for me, I felt like I was hiding myself from the entire world. Mm. And that started at a very young age based on comments friends in school would make, family members would make, just the way I felt the world perceived me and that trauma compacting. And I think the point when I was at my lowest, I felt like there was no hope in getting my life on track to where I wanted it to go. And I can definitely understand as you're getting older, it feels like there's so much work to do to even get close to a dream. Mm. And even through this process of starting the podcast, what I found was that you can do anything that you want to do. And we all know inherently what we should be doing. It's when we let shame hold us back, or we let people's criticism hold us back, or we just don't even think there's a possibility of it happening. And so for me, I actually went the other route. I started with therapy and realized that I wanted to be a coach. And I felt very strongly that I couldn't help other people until I was able to help myself first. And not in a selfish way, but when you're on a plane and they say, put your oxygen mask on first, I needed to put my oxygen mask on first, but all I was doing was helping other people because that's where I thought people valued me. Mm. And so when you talk about getting into your late 30s is where I am now, there was a scary part. In therapy, I'd constantly say, well, when I turn 35, if I haven't accomplished this, or turn 36, or what if I get to 40, like, I want to change my therapy. And I think that there's an interesting confluence of therapy looking back at past trauma and helping people to work through that. And then the coaching that you did sort of in the beginning of what do you want to do next and how can you help yourself accomplish it? Because it's a lot about reflection. So I appreciate that that is the reason you got into it, because when we look at our own lives and our own experiences and then also help others based on our experience helping ourselves, there's so much more, to me, passion and feeling behind it that you know that this person may have experienced a piece of it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it is. And it goes to, I felt like it was important to help my people.
Yeah.
Because, well, not only because I related, I knew that I would understand. When I have clients come in who have worked with other wonderful therapists who they really got a lot from, what they are looking for now when they come to me is the sense that we have a shorthand, that I know what they're talking about. I mean, it can be as simple as like they don't want to explain what the underwear party is. Like they just want me to know and like be able to get past that. Yeah. Because with a previous therapist, they may have had to be like, well, it's this thing that happens, and they want to get right past it.
Yep.
But deeper than that, of course, is just the experience of everybody's different. And, a lot of things I talk about in my videos are these kind of like generalized, experiences. And then when people actually come in for therapy, we're really not talking about generalized experiences. We're talking about very specific moments in their lives, but also just how those moments are showing up today. So it's interesting also what you say about, having like processed things in the past. I almost, when this is not true all the time, but often when people say, well, I worked through that already, I don't believe that because you do work through things, of course, but I think that the work of therapy is not it's not a checklist. It's a constant kind of like deeper uncovering. It's a constant inward searching. And because of that, I know a little bit about your story. I know enough to know that if there's a reenactment of your father-son relationship, that even if you've done a lot of work around it, you still are aware that that is what's happening. And there's the work to do in the moment of differentiating between, what happened and what's happening now.
To that point, I think in therapy, first, I had to realize what had happened, because there was so much of it that I didn't even realize was a problem. I would talk about things that to me felt mundane. Like I went for a walk and went to the grocery store and people's jaw would be on the floor and they couldn't even comprehend what I had just said. Like I was trauma dumping and overwhelming people. Then it was almost like the next phase was, okay, I've identified that I've been through something traumatic. And one of the longest pieces or sections of therapy that I went through was just being able to feel those emotions and identify that I was being triggered. And so for me, what I kind of thought about in therapy was, how do I just take one step forward? So now, or I guess throughout the time, my goal was, if I get triggered, being able to identify it within a month, then within a week, then within a day, then maybe right after a conversation, then in the moment and not react at all. In the moment, pause and react in a constructive way. And I think it's such a great point that therapy is never over. I look at it as it just becomes a smaller and smaller part of my life because I can recognize the dynamics of being triggered, which is not the other person's fault. And also, my goal has been to make it smaller, but it's never going to go away because for me, at least, it was trauma and then this compacted trauma of recreating the same relationships over and over again because I was trying to fix it in the present when you can't. You've been through it and now you have to work to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really well said.
Thank you. You mentioned something earlier, which I think is so powerful, of finding the right therapist, but also knowing when a therapist has provided you a wealth of knowledge and it may be time to move to another therapist. It was the first therapist that I saw recommended. He was straight. He was helping me understand being gay to some extent. And I kept saying to him, it's not that easy. At the time, I thought I wanted to have kids. I still wanted to fit into the mold and get married and have kids and live in the suburbs. And I kept saying, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. And he made an analogy to a very small percentage of the population is Jewish. And if you were to say a small percentage of the population is gay men, people still find each other. And I said, well, take that small percentage of the population and then make it even smaller, because not all gay men want to have a relationship. Not all gay men want to have kids. And we left the therapy session and it wasn't bad. I just was like, I don't feel understood in this moment. And 2 weeks later, he actually came back in one of our sessions and said, I had dinner with a couple that is gay and they said that you were right. And I knew in that moment he had helped me through a really difficult piece. And also we had reached the limits to what he had some personal experience with or knowledge of. And it didn't make him bad. It just made it so that I knew I needed to move on and find a different type of therapy and look at it from a different angle. What are some things that people should look for when they're going to therapy and knowing that it is making an impact?
There are all these studies, endless studies about, what is the most effective therapy. and they do these studies so that insurance can decide, what they want to cover. And what they find over and over and over again is the most important aspect of the therapy that you do is the relationship between the client and the therapist, or the patient and the therapist, however you want to frame it. So that is a way of answering the thing that you're supposed to look for. It really is like dating, unfortunately, and that you want to go in and do you feel a connection, however ephemeral that may feel. Do you feel understood? Do you feel seen? Do you feel listened to? The relationship is the most important thing. So it's really interesting. I can see it going two ways with that therapist that you had. There's a kind of parallel universe in which you stay with that therapist, and no matter what therapist you go to, they're not going to have unlimited knowledge that you don't have. You're a smart, educated adult living in the world. Like, you're going to have a wealth of experience that your therapist doesn't have, no matter what. And so staying with somebody who you feel like, okay, I'm not getting the understanding about this thing, which is important, and you're right about that. This is just the parallel universe version, but you stay with that therapist in order to know what it feels like to maintain an intimate, deep, and sometimes difficult relationship. How do you work through the difficulty? Working through conflict, working through those uncomfortable moments of, and I don't think he did the right thing by coming back to you and saying, like, oh, I messed up. Then like that's a way to repair. And I think you did the right thing by being like, let me go find a gay therapist. And there's another universe in which like you use that kind of rupture and repair it and move through it. And real intimacy is moving through conflict and seeing what's on the other side. And knowing like, oh, we had conflict and I'm okay and you're okay. And we did it with love and respect and trust and all that. So in some ways, that is the healing. That is what's going to make you the most functional and the best version of yourself out in the world, because now you know what it's like to have that relationship. So I think that is the thing to look for. And if you find it and then you decide like I've changed and my needs are different, then that's okay too.
As you were saying that, I was reflecting on 20-something-year-old Charlie and trying to figure out, based on the knowledge that I have now of my trauma, what really was playing out in that moment. And there's a couple things. The first is I felt like I had to be the problem solver my whole life. And I don't think I really felt fully taken care of. Like, I felt from a very young age, like I have to look out for myself and take care of myself. And through therapy, I've realized, and also continue to work on, that you do have to explain your needs sometimes, and you do have to help people understand. And in that moment, because I was in such a dark place, in my head, I thought it wasn't just about him not understanding a piece of my life. It was more about, I don't need to explain to someone how they can help me. Like, I've done that in my life and I'm not doing that here. Like, I'm paying for this. I need you to help me. And I was very hard-headed. The other thing I realized in therapy is that I went to therapy thinking that I had social anxiety and I had a problem with being gay or with gay men. And it was very confusing. And it actually had nothing to do with that. It had to do with my family and my upbringing. And I guess from your perspective with internal family systems, there's a dynamic there that I'd love to get into, because what I realized very quickly was that it was specific relationships in my life, and I was associating them with where I felt uncomfortable or where I felt insecure, and trying to solve the problem in the present day rather than looking into the past to say, why do I feel this way today? Where does this come from? So for those who don't know, can you just, I guess, share a little bit of what is internal family systems in therapy, and then we can use me and dive in to show some examples.
Great. Internal family systems is a specific modality that looks at different parts of ourselves. There are lots of different modalities that work with parts. And one really easy way of thinking about parts is, it's a rainy Sunday and, a part of me wants to keep these plans to go see a movie with a friend at a movie theater, and a part of me wants to stay in my pajamas and go nowhere. This is a very common experience for everybody because everyone has multiple parts within them. So internal family systems, it looks at, it's not, the name kind of is the wrong name because it's not actually just about having a family. It's just the creator of this modality came from doing family systems work. He was a family therapist. And so it was looking at the idea of, well, there are these parts inside of you that like kind of voice your mother and voice your father and voice your uncle or whatever it is. But it's not literally your family. It's very much, have you seen, this is real. Have you seen Inside Out?
Yes.
So that, I haven't looked into it, but I am positive that they must have either consulted with Dick Schwartz, who created IFS, or they must all be in IFS treatment themselves. Because that idea that there's like the part that holds joy, the part that holds sadness, the part that holds anger, the part that holds anxiety, that is a really excellent way of visualizing how IFS works within you. And the difference is that at the center of all that is you. And joy and sadness and anger don't know enough often to trust you because they think that they're protecting 9-year-old Charlie. They're not even aware that 30-whatever-year-old Charlie is here and like has done the work and he's okay. The majority of the time spent is looking at, can we get these parts to see who I am now? And can I have compassion for these parts for working so hard for so long and doing the job in the best way they knew how?
I love that movie, and there was a different framing of it that you provided that really hits home in this period of my life because I recently decided to pause therapy. And I did that because I really did feel like I had a good handle of understanding the dynamics. And do I still get triggered? Yes. Do I know that I'm being triggered? Also, yes. Am I working to pause my reaction and try to minimize it? Always. And I know that's always going to be part of my life because of some of the things that I've been through. And also, I did feel like it was important to pause because I felt like I needed to prove to myself that I didn't need to rely on other people to tell me what I was feeling. And I didn't need to rely on other people to tell me that I was okay and that things would be okay. And it was scary. And also, it has been freeing. And not in a way that I would never go back to therapy. But after all that time, I needed to prove to myself that I didn't have to have it validated by a therapist. That when I went to a therapy session, I had already validated it for myself and understood it. And I needed to believe that because otherwise I'm always relying on someone else. And to your point about 9-year-old Charlie and today Charlie, that is really important. And I think that was my ultimate goal in therapy, was to trust myself and my thought process and how I was feeling. And it's really hard. Like, it is not easy work. Like, I will look straight into the camera and say, like, it was very difficult work. And also, I would not be able to sit here and have this conversation with you if I hadn't done all the therapy, because those inner voices were telling me, you can't do that. You can't live your dreams. You can't be yourself. And it's like an onion. You just have to peel back the layers until you feel confident to do those things that you've always dreamed of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's self with a capital S. This thing that you're talking about, being able to trust it, and it's so important because the therapeutic relationship is a container for you. It's there to hold you, and like there's also a phrase from Winnicott, the good enough therapist is similar to the good enough mother, the good enough father. The good enough mother is going to provide you a container of safety from which you can go off and leave the nest and fly on your own. And that is absolutely the ideal therapeutic situation. And I will say, there is a good way to leave therapy and a not good way to leave therapy. And a good way is to really say goodbye, because if you think about how often in life we intentionally or unintentionally do not say goodbye. Like, oh, I'll see you when I see you. Like, okay, let's make plans, soon. And then you just never see that person again. Or it's years and years go by. It's so important to say goodbye. And here's the work that we did. Here's what I learned from you, for both the therapist and the client. Here's what I learned from you. Here's where we were, and here's where we are. What I'm going to take from this experience with you, and in this context that we have together, which has been an incredibly, probably one of the most intimate and important relationships of your life. Sounds like, in this context, we're saying goodbye.
In this moment, what I take away from that is not just the goodbye aspect, also keeping the door open and knowing that this is a safe person that does understand a lot of the trauma that I've been through in my life, and doing it in the right way is really important, because you do create a dynamic of a relationship that is a therapeutic relationship. But I mean, you hopefully are talking about those inner thoughts and feelings that you hold shame around, to release them. And there may be a moment that comes up in the future that I don't understand. And I would want to be able to go back and say, hey, this happened.
Yeah.
Help me understand that.
Remember this guy?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And it's different for different licenses. But I was trained as a social worker, and so my license is in social work. So I follow the ethics and guidelines of the Social Work National Association of Social Workers. And for us, it's once a client, always a client. So even if 15 years go by for a client that I haven't seen, which hasn't happened, I haven't been practicing that long, but if they call me and they're like, I've just been thinking about you, I don't need therapy, but like, I'd love to get coffee, I can't do that. It's still a therapeutic relationship. And so that's one side of it. And the other side is they can always come back. Always being able to keep that door open is so important. And that's why you say goodbye in this context, because you'll never again be in this context with this therapist. You'll never again have been in therapy for the first time with this therapist. Here's what I'm thinking as we kind of improvise our way through this, is if you're comfortable doing it, looking at some of the things that are going on right now in your life, and so we'll kind of have like the therapeutic conversation, and then we'll have a meta conversation about the therapeutic conversation.
Let's dive in. Where do you want to start?
Well, where do you want to start?
It's the first rule of therapy. It has to be about you. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And it's really, the best place to start is always the thing that just feels present right now. It doesn't have to be the overarching question of your life. Just like today, what is right now? What are you thinking about? What are you feeling?
I am trying to figure out what's next in my life. And obviously building the podcast and building a coaching business and trying to cement a part of my life that I've always really had a lot of self-worth in and work. And also feeling comfortable getting back into more of a social life and finding a city that makes me happy and feeling like I want to put down roots, not like I'm supposed to put down roots, and just trying to navigate and make a conscious decision where I don't feel like I'm rushing and I don't feel like I'm just ripping the Band-Aid off, but really thinking about those decisions. And one aspect is sort of the business side and one aspect is the personal side, and trying to show respect to both when sometimes they can be opposed makes me a little anxious to take a step in any direction and trust that I've really thought through the decision.
Yeah. So as you're talking to me about this, what's happening in your body? Are you aware?
Um, I probably typically when I'm thinking or uncomfortable, I hold my breath more.
Yeah.
So I was definitely holding my breath because I was trying to think through things, and it makes me feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What does it feel like to hold your breath? What happens?
It feels natural,
Yeah.
which is not, but
Right.
that's,
It feels safe.
yeah, it feels safe.
Okay. Any tightening up, any of the muscles any tingles?
No, but I find that when I'm talking about myself, I don't want to make eye contact, that I'm looking up, just trying to be with my own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that pulls me a little bit out of the present.
Right. So what we're doing now, this is the meta part. The meta part of looking at what's the process here? Because you're telling me something that's really important to you, something that you're really in the soup of right now. How do I move forward while honoring my work, honoring, the personal and interpersonal goals that I have? And we're looking at what happens to your body just in communicating that's where you're at. And so what you're talking about, holding your breath, yeah, you've done so much work. You know that like this is a habitual protective stance you take. Held breath, chest up, and eyes averted. So yeah, so you're aware. Do you have a feeling toward the part of you that clenches, that holds its breath? Do you have a reaction to the part of you that wants to hold its breath?
Because it's so subconscious, I know that I do it. And I know, even if we had started and you were to say, what's your body going to do when you talk about something uncomfortable? I would have been able to articulate that to you. I think from the meta version, that's where I felt safe. Like that feeling of holding my breath, wanting something, like if I was getting yelled at, for that to be over, or just going until I didn't have any more air. Like that feeling of, it gave me a sense of control.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to hold on to what small piece of myself I still had at that time.
Right. So look what you're doing so beautifully. You're identifying the job that part, the part that holds its breath, it has that very specific job, holding on to control, protecting you in this very specific way. So just here with me now, how do you feel towards that part of you that holds your breath in order to control?
I want to laugh because the idea is so ridiculous that holding my breath could actually save me from something. If you think about human nature, you want as much breath as possible to run away from a predator.
Right.
Like I can look at it now and smile because I know that that's not actually going to protect me. Even just as you were talking about it, I took a deep breath, and that's something that I did learn in therapy, to pause before I say something. And even just doing it right now with you, once I took the deep breath, I'm like, yeah, I know that this makes no sense. Like it is a subconscious belief that that's going to protect me, which makes me happy that I can recognize it. And it may in the moment obviously not be something that I can let go of immediately, but as we talk about it and reflect, I know the tools to let it go. And that does make me happy because it doesn't mean that it's permanent.
That's right. And another way to look at it, you're saying it's a subconscious part of you, and looking at it now, it doesn't really make sense. Another way to look at it is, when's the first time that you remember holding your breath as a way to maintain control? Do you know? Do you have an idea of that?
No, but like my whole body just felt like it went numb when you asked that question.
Okay. So yeah, come back to me if you can. And what's it like to come back to me?
It's I felt uneasy, not with the conversation, but whatever that first moment was something that I would assume was traumatic. And that tingling, I actually typically feel that more with anger, where when I get really mad, like when I get really mad, I get hot and I start to tingle, and I know that I'm going to, well, I used to explode. Now I have learned that it is a transference to other situations in my life. But it was that same feeling of holding two things at once, where I'm scared and nervous and also absolutely furious and ready to fight. So it's an uncomfortable feeling because I don't want to be that person. I don't want to replicate what was done to me to other people. And that's really why I started therapy.
Right. So what's going on right now in your body?
I'm relaxing more.
Okay.
I still feel like I'm holding my breath a little bit.
Okay. So do this for me. Feel your feet on the floor, both of them. Yeah. Feel the places where you're connected to the couch or to the chair beneath you and behind you. And start to breathe into your belly. Breathe into it like there's a balloon in there that you can inflate. When you exhale slowly, exhale completely. Then even hold your breath out at the bottom before the next inhale. Yeah. And then inhale when you're ready. Yeah. So in this way, you're just kind of making some more space. Making more space. And what's that like?
Oh, the whole room feels brighter.
Brighter?
The whole room feels brighter.
Okay. Okay. So what if I ask you that same question again? And let's put the more intellectualized perspective on top of it. The point of the work is never to go back and re-experience a traumatic event. The point might be eventually to be there with the kid who experienced the trauma, but never to re-experience it, because you're here now, you're you now. And so I'm in no way asking you to go back there. So what's that like to hear me say that? What happens?
My brain goes to knowing that I could comfort or console that version of me going through it.
That's right.
And it's hard to hold on to the piece of not experiencing it again, because I think for me, I wanted things to play out differently, and it won't. And I think that was a big part of therapy, of accepting what has been. And so it's hard to be there and also not want to fight back, because I know that the child version of me did fight back, whether it was yelling, whether it was screaming. I fought back in whatever way I felt like I could. And so it's hard to let go of some of that anger, because if I were to go back, I'd want to fight back as an adult. And it's not because I don't think young Charlie could get through it, because I'm sitting here today talking about it. It's more of a sense of no one should have to go through certain things. And I think part of the reason why I started the podcast was because if each episode could help one person make a slight change in their life, it felt like going through these things and sharing those stories would make it somehow worth it, because I have made it to a different place. And when you were talking about in the beginning of people get to a certain age and they feel hopeless and they are struggling and unfortunately take their own life in certain situations, I know what that feeling feels like, and I know how alone I felt. And I also know that each step forward made it a little bit better, whether it was with therapy or different accomplishments, but it wasn't easy. And it's really hard to fight for yourself when you remember what it's like in those moments. And so I think that's where the anger comes from. And I try to breathe and release the anger and not let it out, because I know that that's what was done to me. And also, like, I'm ready to burn the whole place down,
Right.
like, at the same time. And those are two hard things to hold because they're the same and also different.
Right. So since we're not in an actual therapy session, I'll kind of talk you through what we would do,
Yeah.
you know, because one of the ways that this work today might have gone, would be to say, okay, so you see that kid, and then we eventually work toward the adult you, essentially imagining the adult you being in the room and fighting back. I would never want you to release your anger. I would want you to hold your anger and be exactly as angry as you are, and do what you feel like, actually, like, do a do-over, do a redo of what you wish had happened. And there's a reason for that. It's not, and a lot of people do say, oh, well, what's the point of that? Because it's not what happened. It's what I wish happened, but it's not what happened. And the reason that therapy works, one kind of like neuroscientific hypothesis of why therapy works, is because of neuroplasticity, meaning that, like, your brain can continue to mold and change as you grow. And so by doing a redo of the situation as you wish it had been, in some ways your brain does not know the difference between the do-over and what actually happened. It's why if I were to talk you through a kind of guided meditation of, like, being on a boat and, like, coming up to a beach and, like, going to, like, a lovely hotel, I could ask you, is there a difference between that memory, or rather a memory of, like, going on vacation, and the memory that I just talked you through? And usually the answer is no. Like, your brain can't really differentiate, which is a very strange thing. It's why false memories are really easy to, what's the word? Implant.
Mm-hmm.
It's why our memories are so fallible. So all of that to say is there's a lot of reason to go back and be your adult self, holding on to your adult anger, and do for that kid what needed to be done at the time. What do you think about what I'm saying?
It definitely resonates.
Yeah.
And I think the anger is the scary thing, that for so long I felt like if I was angry, I would end up being the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I would end up hurting people in the way that I would be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I knew from a very young age that I should fight back, and I did. And in some ways, I had all the anger and I let it all out. And I actually think a lot of my work, as we're talking about this, and something that has been really helpful in this conversation for me, was to not have anger and to have the other side of it and be empathetic, because I am the person that's like, cross me once and, like, I will lay you out.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always known that I could do that because I had to. I think it's the other side of it that I had to learn, which was the empathy and understanding, not just for myself, but sometimes also for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily exactly the same context in which we're talking about it, which might be confusing, but I didn't have empathy for myself. And I just had the anger. And so that, even just thinking through that in those moments, it's like, no, I actually, little Charlie fought back. He just needed a hug after.
Right.
And so that, as we were going through it, I was like, something's missing here. Like, I'm missing a piece of this puzzle, but that's really what it was.
I love how intuitively you're getting to exactly what that part of you needs. Intuitively you understand that compassion for that younger self was the missing component. And that is so much a part of the redo. And compassion is kind of a hallmark of being in self. If you're able to feel compassion for your parts, if you're able to feel compassion for whoever else is in that situation even, it's a way of knowing, oh, I actually have enough self here to do for that kid what needed to be done.
Yeah.
So to bounce back to this idea of holding your breath, what's so wonderful about that is, you were calling it a subconscious reflex, almost a subconscious protection, but it's also maybe a different way to look at it would be that this younger part of you didn't know that didn't make sense. It made complete sense to this younger part of you. It didn't have the information that you have now. So it's not so much a subconscious part as a younger part, just who was doing what he knew. And it's actually, it's a very natural thing to hold your breath when you're afraid. It's almost a kind of like conservation, like you're conserving for the moment where you need to breathe deeply and run or whatever it is. So if you can think about that younger part of you just doing the best he could in that moment with the tool that just kind of came naturally, how do you feel toward him?
Good job, little buddy.
Yeah, right?
I think that something my mom quotes a lot or says a lot is, well, actually my mom and my brother, I think my brother actually said it and now my mom repeats it. That's a whole different dynamic. But we did the best we could with the information we had at the time.
That's right.
And it's such a freeing acceptance because you can't know everything. And I think for me, at least, when I've been through those traumatic things, I blamed myself, but I also didn't know any better. And when I've learned from them, I haven't made those same mistakes. And so even if in those moments it's difficult, being able to reflect on it in therapy, and yes, I'm still frustrated those things happened in the past, and also learning to say, it's okay, you didn't know any better. And now that you do know better, if you're in the same situation, do something differently. And I think the reward is you do it differently and get a different result. And that compounds into building self, or at least for me, it did. Man, I feel like I know this was not a therapy session, but it definitely brought up a lot of different things. And I'm really appreciative that we kind of went through those, because I think something interesting about therapy is everyone's going to come at it from a different angle, and everyone has their own lived experience and their own therapeutic experience. And it's a unique dynamic where we're experiencing it and then also looking at it from a 30,000 foot view.
Right.
But I appreciate going through all that with you, because it did remind me to look from a slightly different angle and use some other tools that I've had to reflect and reposition even during the time that we've been sitting here.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
From everything that we talked about today, what message do you want to leave people with?
I think self-compassion is such an abstract concept. And yet having compassion for yourself and for all of your parts, and really for everything that's alive on the earth, is transformative. And a lot of the work of therapy is getting to that place of compassion for yourself and for all of your parts. And that is something I want everybody to know. Because I believe it's just truth. Like, not my therapeutic perspective, not my training. I think it's just truth,
What is something that someone has told you that's impacted your life and you'll never forget?
The thing that comes up is a negative experience that I had that in a lot of ways I still haven't. It wasn't terribly negative, but like it's something that has stuck with me and I still can't quite make sense of it. So I was at a dance training program. Like I said, I grew up dancing and I was always at a training program over the summers. And I was at a training program over the summer when I was in college. So I was like 21 years old, or 20 years old. And one of my dance heroes was running the program. And I kind of felt emboldened one day to ask this person, what can I work on? Like obviously I'm here to train, like, what do you think I need to work on? And they were they kind of recoiled from me and said, Brian, you're nothing but nice. And I still don't really know what that means. And I'm always investigating that. Not always. I'm often kind of returning to that, being wondering if that's which is what could that possibly mean? So did it impact me? I think it impacted me in the way that a kind of unanswerable question impacts you. Am I nothing but nice? What on earth could that mean? Should I also be mean? Should I kind of take it to mean that this person did not see a depth to me or to my work. That's kind of how I've interpreted it over the years. And knowing a little bit about this person, you had to have grit and complexity and darkness to succeed. And I think I have complexity and darkness, and this person didn't see it. So it's such a non-transformative thing, and yet it really made me think. Here's what it made me think. Yes, this is right. It really made me think, what is the difference between what I'm presenting to the world? What am I presenting to the world versus what do I feel is my reality inside? And those two things at 20 years old were vastly different, miles and miles apart. And that's something that I work on. I work with a lot of my clients, especially in group therapy, on showing up and dropping your social roles and dropping the roles that are habitual in any dynamic, and just being there, not in a role. Because he was right, in that context. I know I've just said he, but it's fine. He was right in that training context. I had learned to be the best student, and I love being a student. And so I learned that was my role, to get the teacher to like me, to get, to stand in the front, to be the best I could be, and so that's what I was presenting, which seems appropriate, honestly, but not if you're never showing anything else. So that's my long answer to that. Thank you for giving me the space to work that out as I sat here.
I loved it. I love when people do a negative one, because I think the negative things really do make an impact. Just based on some of the things that you said today, there's a couple interesting components to it. One, to me, it feels like a projection of this person that they don't have that nice part and no one's ever seen them that way. And the fact that you could be successful without being tough, or I'll say an asshole because I don't know who this person is.
Yeah, he was an asshole.
Is impossible, right? Like that could not compute for them. And to me, it sounded like jealousy, because you could be at the top of your class and also be nice. And I actually think that is such an important lesson, that we don't have to tear people down to make ourselves successful. And I could do a whole podcast on this, why that doesn't work in business, why that doesn't work on social media, and all of that. And also the way you described Chicago in the beginning and your love for it and your excitement for it and also helping other people at the same time and wanting to explore therapy and what else could you do. There's part of you that has always given back, whether it was to the audience, whether it was to people you worked with, having empathy for people that you don't even know that have gone through similar things. And here is this person that I would imagine was very self-centered, took anyone out that they needed to. And I'm just making some assumptions here, but that comment says more about them than it does about you. And I think the fact that they couldn't see the fact that you are a good human being and still successful, that doesn't make sense to me, because we should all strive to do that. We can do more together, helping each other, than any of us can do individually.
That's so true. And, if we were going to do a second half of this episode right now, as you're talking, I'm also thinking about, it's always important to look at what the lookalike situations are in your life. Like, where have I felt like that with a person in power, like a teacher or a director or a choreographer or whatever they are, a person in power? When have I felt just like I did right then? And this is kind of one of those generalized gay experiences that is also can be also very specific. The older gay man looking at the younger gay man, and like you said, the jealousy inherent in that, because youth is a commodity, in the world, period. And then in gay culture, it's so heightened. For a dancer, it's, another layer. There are always layers to what's going on. And that's for another time, I guess.
Another episode.
Yeah.
Well, now's the time we're going to turn the tables in a different way. What's a question that you have for me? And it can be anything.
What I want to know is, do you have the love you're looking for in your life?
For myself, something that I think about, and it kind of relates to this transition of what do I want the next chapter of my life to look like, is rebuilding that and going slowly. And I feel like I'm in a place where I have an equilibrium and there is love for myself, and it's new and it's fragile and I don't want to lose it. And I know that it's there, and that is definitely a new feeling for me. And I think that I want to build on that and continue to explore it in a way that feels safe with people that I feel safe with, and hold on to it, because for so much of my life, I had none. And now that I've kind of discovered this love for myself and the work that I'm doing and who I've become and who I am, I want to explore it more and see where it takes me. And I think a lot of us are doing that at different levels and in different ways. And for me, it just is new and it makes me happy. And I think that's part of the reason why I am being so cautious, because I think for so long when something wasn't working, I didn't want to waste any more time because I knew it wasn't working, right? That had more to do with me than anyone else, because I was like, you don't love yourself in this situation, like get to another one where you can try again. And I think the building it up slowly is actually the part that I love the most, where I am a little bit more in control in a good way of, yeah, I love myself and I'm not going to do this, or I love myself and I'm not going to repeat this old pattern. So I'm really happy with where I am right now. And that is something very new and different.
I'm so glad.
Thank you.
I'm so glad. I am. Yeah, I feel that from you for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for exploring all this with me today and for sharing that story.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of Turtzed, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if today's episode got you thinking, laughing, crying, or maybe even rolling your eyes, write a review and tap to rate. Now let's be real. This convo doesn't end here. Hit us up on socials and don't be shy. Slide into our DMs. We love to connect. Thanks for hanging with us today, and catch you on the next one, because our journey together is just getting started. Remember, stay curious, live authentically, and keep turtzing it up.